Billionaire adopts baby abandoned in a cardboard box. 5 years later, a taxi arrives with a shocking truth that brings him to tears. Dylan Fox walked down the empty street, his footsteps echoing on the wet asphalt. It was 9:30 p.m. He had left his car in the company parking lot. He needed fresh air, space to think after another day of meetings and numbers that wouldn't stop running through his mind. Streetlights cast soft yellow pools on the sidewalk. The city was quiet, only the distant hum of traffic and his own footsteps breaking the silence. That's when he heard it. A cry. Dylan stopped. He looked around. The street was deserted. Only a few parked cars and the darkened storefronts. The sound came from nearby, faint but insistent. A baby. He shook his head and continued walking. It wasn't his problem. Someone would show up. Someone always did. But the crying persisted, and it seemed to be growing weaker. Dylan took a few more steps, trying to ignore it. But something about the sound bothered him. It wasn't hunger or fussiness. It was desperation. Pure, simple desperation. He stopped again and turned back. He followed the sound to a dimly lit corner near a trash bin. There, pressed against a brick wall, was a cardboard box, small with holes on the sides. From inside came that cry cutting through the cold night air. Dylan approached slowly. The box was partially closed. He lifted one flap, a newborn baby, tiny, wrapped in a faded pink blanket. Her eyes were closed, but her mouth wobbled in a cry that was already hoarse. She couldn't have been more than a few days old. Dylan stood there, frozen, staring at that tiny being. He didn't know what to do. He'd never held a baby in his life. He saw a folded note next to the child. He picked it up and opened it under the faint glow of the streetlight. She deserves a chance. That's it. 4 words in shaky handwriting. Dylan looked at the baby again. She had stopped crying and was staring at him with dark, bright eyes, as if she recognized him. He took a step back. This wasn't his responsibility. He had to call the police, child services, someone who knew how to handle this. He began to walk away, but the baby started crying again. And this time, Dylan felt something strange in his chest, like something squeezing him from the inside. He looked around. The street was empty. No one else had heard. No one else was coming. Dylan knelt and carefully picked the baby up. She was too light, too warm. And the moment he lifted her, she stopped crying. "Okay," Dylan murmured, unsure whom he was talking to. "Okay." The baby stared back at him intently, as if waiting for him for a long time. Dylan walked back toward the company lot, holding her like she was made of glass. When he reached his car, he opened the back door and placed her on the seat, smoothing the blanket around her. "Where should I take you?" he asked softly. The answer came naturally. Home. His mansion was in an upscale area of the city, surrounded by well-manicured gardens. He parked on the circular drive and stayed there a moment, looking at the baby through the rearview mirror. What was he doing? He was a businessman. He knew how to close million-dollar deals, fire employees, make tough decisions without blinking. But there, with that child in the back seat, he felt completely lost. The baby began to cry again. Dylan got out of the car and scooped her into his arms. She fit entirely within his span. "Shh," he said, rocking her gently. "We'll figure this out." Inside the house, the first thing he did was call his assistant. "Margaret, I need help." "Mr. Fox, it's almost 10 p.m. "Is everything okay?" Dylan looked down at the baby, who was quiet in his arms, her eyes fixed on his face. "I found a child. A baby. I need baby things, diapers, bottles, clothes, everything I can get." "A child? Sir, have you called the police?" "Not yet. I need those things first. Can you get them tonight?" There was a pause. "Mr. Fox, it's almost 10 p.m. "Margaret, it's urgent." "All right, I'll see what I can do. Maybe I can find something at 24-hour pharmacies." "Perfect. Pay whatever it takes." "Mr. Fox, may I ask?" "I'll explain tomorrow. Just get everything." Okay. Dylan hung up and looked at the baby. She had fallen asleep in his arms. And now, he murmured. He carried her to the living room sofa and sat down, careful not to wake her. The house was quiet, only the tick of a wall clock marking the minutes. Dylan had never thought about having children. It wasn't part of his plans. He was too focused on work, too ambitious to divide his attention with anything or anyone. But there, with that child sleeping in his arms, he felt something he couldn't explain, a responsibility beyond any contract or deal. "You need a name," Dylan said softly, looking at her. "Claire. How about Claire?" The baby didn't answer, but Dylan felt she approved. Margaret arrived 2 hours later with bags full of supplies. She saw Dylan holding the baby and didn't ask unnecessary questions. "I got bottles, powdered formula, diapers in various sizes," she said, laying everything on the table, "and some basic outfits." "Thank you, Margaret. You're a lifesaver." "Mr. Fox, do you know how to care for a baby?" Dylan looked at Claire, still sleeping in his arms. "No, but I'll learn." Margaret nodded and left, promising to return in the morning to help with whatever was needed. That first night, Dylan barely slept. Claire woke 3 times crying, and he tried to handle everything himself, making bottles, changing diapers, soothing her. It wasn't easy, but he managed. The next morning, Margaret arrived early. "Mr. Fox, you need professional help," she said, seeing his dark circles. "Someone who knows how to care for babies." Dylan nodded. He had been up all night and already knew he couldn't do this alone. "Do you know anyone?" "Eleanor Hartwell. She's experienced, worked with several families. Can I call her?" "Call her." An hour later, Eleanor arrived. She was a middle-aged woman with grey hair in a bun and a gentle smile. She looked at Dylan holding Claire and asked no questions. "She seems healthy," Eleanor said, examining Claire carefully. "A few days old, I'd say. She needs a medical checkup, but nothing urgent." "Can you stay?" Dylan asked. "To care for her while I sort things out." Eleanor smiled. "Of course, Mr. Fox." She took Claire into her arms and the baby didn't protest. Eleanor had that natural way Dylan knew he'd never have. "I'll prepare a nursery for her," Eleanor said, "and I'll take care of everything. Don't worry." Dylan nodded, feeling immense relief. In the following days, Dylan arranged everything. He registered Claire as his adopted daughter, hired lawyers to formalize the adoption, and turned one of the rooms into a fully equipped nursery. Eleanor cared for Claire with tenderness. She fed her bottles, changed diapers, rocked her whenever she cried. And Dylan watched, trying to understand how that child had changed his life so quickly. He walked through the rooms and heard Eleanor talking to Claire, singing softly, laughing when the baby made a sound. The house felt different, more alive. But Dylan was still Dylan. He left early, returned late. Sometimes when he got home, Claire was already asleep. He'd go to her room and sit there, watching her sleep, feeling that ache in his chest he couldn't explain. "I love you," he murmured softly, as if it were a secret. And it was true. He loved that child in a way he never thought possible. But love and presence were different things. Claire grew up in Eleanor's arms. She learned to smile first at her, babbled her first words while Eleanor made funny faces. Dylan was always working. When Claire was 6 months old, she already recognized Dylan. She smiled when he came home, reached her little arms out to him, and Dylan melted. He'd pick her up, play for a few minutes, say he loved her, but then the phone rang, or he remembered an important email, or a meeting he couldn't miss. "Just a minute," he told Claire, who didn't understand but sensed it. Eleanor watched in silence. She cared for Claire as if she were her own granddaughter, but she knew it wasn't the same. Claire needed her father. When Claire turned 1, she was walking and saying a few words, Nanny for Eleanor, Daddy for Dylan, but only when he was around, which wasn't often. Dylan bought expensive gifts, imported toys, designer clothes. But Claire wanted attention, not things. She wanted him to sit on the floor and play with her, to read stories before bed, to be present. Sometimes Dylan tried. He'd sit on the couch with Claire in his lap and open a storybook. She'd sit quietly, paying attention, her eyes wide. But after a few pages, the phone would ring, or he'd remember something urgent. "I'm sorry, Claire," he'd say, rubbing her hair. "Daddy has to work." Claire didn't understand the words, but she understood the gesture. She understood he was leaving again. When Claire was 2, she already knew Dylan was different from other parents. She saw children in the park with their parents, playing, running, laughing together. And she had Eleanor, who was wonderful, but it wasn't the same. Dylan would come home and Claire would run to him, happy. He'd pick her up, kiss her, say he loved her, and she believed him, but then he'd put her down and disappear again. "Daddy has to work," he always said. Claire didn't know what work was, but she knew it was something that took her father away. She began making drawings for him. Colorful scribbles that Eleanor helped hang on the refrigerator. When Dylan came home, Claire would show him the drawings, proud. "That's beautiful, Claire," he'd say, smiling. "Daddy loves your drawings." But he never asked about the drawings, never asked what she had done during the day, never asked about anything. Eleanor tried talking to him a few times. "She misses you, Mr. Fox," she said gently. "She needs more time with you." Dylan nodded. "I know. I'll try to organize my schedule better." But the schedule never got organized. There was always something more urgent, always a meeting that couldn't be postponed. At 3 years old, Claire already understood Dylan loved her, but also understood he wasn't staying. She stopped expecting him at night, stopped running to the door when she heard the car in the garage. She played with Eleanor, who took her to the park, taught her to ride a bike, read stories before bed. Eleanor did everything a father should do. But Claire still wished Dylan would do those things too. When he came home, she'd go to him, but without the same urgency she once had. He'd pick her up, say he loved her, and she believed him. But she also knew he would leave again. "Daddy, will you play with me?" she'd ask sometimes. "Of course, princess. Let me just finish something here." But the something never ended. Claire learned to love Dylan even while missing him. She learned love didn't mean presence. She learned "I love you" could be true even when the person didn't stay, and Dylan continued to be Dylan. Working, building his empire, making big decisions, but missing the important moments. Missing first steps, first words, first drawings, missing Claire. He didn't realize. He thought he was being a good father, that providing and protecting were enough. That love was what you said, not what you showed. And Claire grew up knowing she was loved, but also knowing she wasn't a priority. She was 4 when she understood that this was the only way her father loved her, and she decided she would accept it. Because even so, even with all the absence, she loved him too. But deep down, she still hoped that one day he would stay, that one day he would choose her instead of work. That one day he would realize she was growing, and that lost time could never be recovered. And so Claire turned 5, a girl who could draw colorful hearts, who knew all the stories Eleanor told, who waited for weekends when Dylan sometimes stayed home a little longer. A girl who loved the father who saved her, even though he never had time to be saved by her. Claire was sitting at the kitchen table, her feet swinging in the air, holding a red crayon. She was 5 now, brown hair always tied with a ribbon by Eleanor, and dark eyes that sparkled whenever she heard her father's car in the driveway. "What are you drawing, sweetie?" Eleanor asked, preparing her after-school snack. "A note for Daddy," Claire replied, focused. "So he doesn't forget." Eleanor leaned in and saw the paper covered with colorful drawings, a yellow sun, 2 figures holding hands, and words written in the unsteady handwriting of a 5-year-old. "Daddy and me, just us today." "He promised we'd go to the park today," Claire explained proudly. "He said today would be just ours." Eleanor smiled, but there was sadness in her eyes. She had seen many notes like that, and she knew how they usually ended. "That's lovely, Claire. I'm sure he'll love it." Claire carefully folded the paper and ran to the living room. where she placed the note on Dylan's desk. It was always the same ritual: draw, write, wait. At 6 p.m., Claire stood by the living room window. Dylan had promised to arrive at 6 to take her to the park. She wore her favorite dress, the blue one with white flowers, and had asked Eleanor to braid her hair into 2 pigtails. "He'll come," she murmured to herself, watching every car that passed on the street. 6:15 p.m., 6:30 p.m., 7 p.m. "Claire, how about we have dinner?" Eleanor suggested gently. "No, he said he'd come at 6. He must be on his way." Eleanor sighed. She knew that scene by heart. The girl waiting, eyes glued to the window, refusing to accept that Dylan wouldn't come. At 8 p.m. the phone rang. "Claire, it's your father," Eleanor said. Claire ran to answer, her heart pounding. "Daddy." "Hi, Princess. I'm sorry, but it'll have to be another day, okay? An important meeting came up and—" "But you promised—" Claire interrupted, her voice beginning to quiver. "You said today was ours." "I know, sweetie. But sometimes work, you understand, right? We'll go tomorrow, I promise. You always say tomorrow." There was a pause on the other end. "Claire, I'll make it up to you, okay? Daddy loves you so much." "I love you too, Daddy." She hung up and stood there, staring at the phone. Eleanor approached and held her. "He had to work again," Claire said softly. "I know, sweetheart. He said he loves me. And he really does. Then why does he never stay?" Eleanor didn't know what to say. The next morning, Claire woke up hopeful again. Maybe today would be different. Maybe today Dylan would remember his promise. She made another note. This time she drew a house with 2 windows and a red door. Inside the house, 2 smiling stick figures. "Daddy, will you come play?" She placed the paper on Daddy's desk, next to yesterday's note that Dylan still hadn't seen. During breakfast, Claire told Eleanor all the plans she had made. "We'll play that card game you taught me, and then he can teach me to ride my bike without training wheels, and at night, we'll watch a movie together." Eleanor smiled, trying not to show what she really thought. "That sounds like a perfect day, Claire." At 5 p.m., Dylan arrived home. Claire was in the yard playing with her dolls, but she ran to him as soon as she heard the car. "Daddy, you came home early today." Dylan picked her up and kissed her forehead. "Hey, Princess, how was your day?" "I made a note for you. Want to see it?" "Sure, but let me just take care of a quick call, okay?" He set her down and grabbed the ringing phone. "Dylan Fox." Claire waited by his side. The call lasted 10 minutes, then 15, then half an hour. "Daddy," she whispered, tugging at his pant leg. Dylan motioned for her to wait and continued talking about contracts and meetings. Claire went to the living room and brought her note. She stood there, holding the paper, waiting. When Dylan finally hung up, he looked at Claire as if he'd forgotten she was there. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. What did you want to show me?" Claire extended the note, but Dylan was already checking other emails on his phone. "That's nice," he said without really looking. "Daddy needs to take care of a few things here, okay?" And he disappeared into his office. Claire stood in the living room holding the note he barely saw. Eleanor came over and sat next to her on the couch. "He saw your drawing," Eleanor said. "He did, but he was distracted," Claire replied. "He's always distracted." Eleanor put an arm around Claire. "Sometimes adults worry too much about work. More than me." The question cut Eleanor's heart. "No, sweetie. He worries a lot about you. He just doesn't know how to show it." Claire rested her head on Eleanor's shoulder. "I wish he would stay with me, just for a little while." I know. Days passed in the same pattern. Claire made notes, waited for Dylan, and he always had something more urgent to do, meetings, calls, contracts that couldn't wait. She learned not to expect too much. She learned that today is just for us meant maybe, if nothing more important came up, he would have a few minutes for her. But she kept trying. She made a colorful calendar, marking every day Dylan promised to spend with her. The days stayed blank one after another. She drew family pictures, always her, Dylan, and Eleanor together, always smiling. She wrote letters about her day, about the books Eleanor read to her, about her friends at school. Sometimes Dylan found the notes in the middle of calls or meetings. He'd smile quickly, say they were lovely, promise to keep them all, but Claire knew he forgot the moment he left the room. "Why do you keep making notes for him?" Lily, her school friend, asked one day. "My dad says when someone doesn't pay attention to you, it's better to stop trying." Claire thought about the question for a long time. "Because I love Daddy," she finally replied. "And when you love someone, you don't stop." Lily frowned. "But isn't it painful when he never calls?" "It is," Claire admitted. "But I still love him anyway." And it was true. Despite broken promises, calls in the middle of playtime, dinners alone because Dylan got home late, Claire still loved her father. She had learned that love didn't depend on presence, that it was possible to love someone even while missing them. Every morning, Dylan left early for the office. Every night he returned late, tired, his phone always ringing. Claire tried to tell him about her day, show her drawings, but he always had an urgent call to take. "Just a minute, princess," was his favorite phrase. But the minute turned into an hour, and the hour turned into night, and Claire ended up falling asleep without her father's time. Eleanor watched everything in silence. She cared for Claire as if she were her own granddaughter, but she knew it wasn't the same. Claire needed her father. She needed him to stop, even if just for 5 minutes, and truly see her. But Dylan was always too busy. There was always something more important. On a Tuesday afternoon, Dylan was in his home office, on the phone about a corporate merger. It was a complex negotiation, millions at stake, and he gestured nervously as he discussed terms. That's when he saw through the window a yellow taxi pull up in front of the mansion. Dylan frowned, not stopping his conversation. He wasn't expecting anyone. The driver, a middle-aged man wearing a cap, walked to the front door. "No, I won't accept less than 15 million for the division," Dylan said, watching the stranger ring the bell. "We're set for tomorrow at 9. The bell rang through the house. Eleanor appeared in the hallway and opened the door. Dylan could see them through the window, but he heard nothing but his own voice arguing about numbers. The driver handed something to Eleanor, an envelope, it seemed. She nodded, thanked him, and the man returned to his cab. Seconds later, the yellow car disappeared down the street. "How can they want to renegotiate?" Dylan continued on the call, seeing Eleanor approach his office door. She knocked gently and entered, holding a white envelope. "Mr. Fox, a taxi driver brought this for you," she said politely. Dylan waved her off impatiently, still on the phone. "Hey, it's impossible to close at that price. We're set for tomorrow at 9. Eleanor placed the envelope on his desk and left silently. Dylan continued discussing figures and deadlines for another half hour, pacing in his office. When he finally hung up, he was exhausted. He sat down and rubbed his temples. That's when he noticed the envelope on the desk. No sender, no stamp. Just his name written in unsure, slightly shaky handwriting. Dylan Fox. He picked up the envelope, curious. Who would send something by taxi, and why not regular mail? He opened it without haste, still mulling over the numbers from the negotiation he had just wrapped up. A photo fell out. Dylan froze mid-sentence. He abruptly ended the phone call. The photo showed a young woman in a simple uniform, those blue outfits cleaning staff wore. She was holding a baby in her arms, smiling at the camera. The woman seemed tired, but there was genuine happiness in her eyes. Dylan flipped the photo. On the back, in handwriting he recognized immediately, was written, "She is your daughter." The world stopped. Dylan looked at the photo again. The woman was Camila Rodriguez. She had worked at Fox Enterprises 2 years ago on the night cleaning team. He remembered her perfectly, always polite, always smiling when she saw him in the empty hallways during late nights he stayed working. Dark hair tied in a ponytail, large expressive eyes. They had started with casual conversations. She'd ask if he wanted her to clean the office now or come back later. He'd say he could keep working, that her presence didn't bother him. Then they had longer talks. She'd tell him about her nursing studies. She was taking classes during the day. He'd talk about work stress, the pressure of running a company. One night, after a particularly difficult meeting, she offered him coffee. He accepted. They talked until dawn, and one thing led to another. It was only a few times, brief encounters when the company was empty. Nothing serious, nothing that would compromise his reputation, or so Dylan thought, until he heard rumors from other employees that there were whispers about the boss and the cleaning lady, that it could affect his image, his business. So he fired her. He lied about budget cuts, reducing the cleaning staff. He gave her a generous severance package, a letter of recommendation. He tried to make it easy. Camilla didn't protest. She just nodded, thanked him for the opportunity, and left. Dylan never thought about her again. Until now. He looked at the photo once more. The baby in her arms looked only a few months old. Dark hair, big eyes, like Claire when she was little. Like Claire. Dylan sank into his office chair, his legs shaking. He did the math in his head. Camilla had been fired 2.5 years ago. If she was pregnant then and didn't say anything? He looked toward the staircase, where he could hear Claire's voice chatting with Eleanor. His daughter. The girl he had found in a box, whom he had registered as his own, whom he loved in a way he never thought possible. Could she really be his daughter, by blood and not just by choice? Dylan put the photo in his pocket and climbed the stairs. Claire was in her room organizing her books. "Hi, Daddy," she said, running to hug him. "You came to see me." Dylan picked her up and looked into her eyes, dark like Camilla's, like his own. "Claire," he said, his voice trembling, "Daddy loves you so much. You know that, right?" "I know," she replied, smiling. "And I love you too." Dylan hugged her tightly, feeling a mix of love and guilt that suffocated him. If Claire was Camilla's child, then the woman he had used and discarded had become pregnant. She had given birth alone. She had been so desperate that she abandoned her own daughter in a box on the street, and he hadn't known. "Daddy, are you okay?" Claire asked, noticing his expression. "I'm fine," Dylan lied. "I was just thinking about how much you've grown." Claire smiled and returned to her books. Dylan went downstairs, the photo burning in his pocket. He needed to find Camilla. He needed to know the truth. But first he needed to look at Claire with new eyes. The girl he had chosen to love might have been his by right from the start, and that changed everything. Or maybe it changed nothing. Claire was still the same girl who made colorful notes for him, who waited by the window when he promised to come home early, who loved him despite all his flaws. The only difference now was that Dylan knew she might have inherited that capacity to love unconditionally, from Camilla and from him. Two people who had met on an empty night, connected for a moment, and created something bigger than themselves. Claire, his daughter, by choice and, possibly, by blood. Dylan took the photo from his pocket and looked at it again. Camilla smiled at the camera, holding that baby who was now up in her room, arranging books and waiting for her father to have time for her. He put the photo in the office drawer and went up to Claire's room. "Want to play with me, Daddy?" she asked hopefully. And for the first time in a long time, Dylan answered, "Yes. Today is just ours." Claire smiled as if it were the most precious gift in the world, and maybe it was. Dylan put the photo in the office drawer, but couldn't get it out of his mind. He lay awake all night, staring at the ceiling, doing mental calculations. The dates lined up perfectly. Camilla had been fired 2.5 years ago. Claire was 5 now, which meant Camilla had been pregnant when... He shook his head. He couldn't jump to conclusions. But the possibility haunted him. The next morning, Dylan watched Claire at breakfast with new eyes. She sat at the table, eating cereal and swinging her legs, as always. But now he looked for resemblances, the shape of her eyes, the color of her hair, the way she smiled. For the first time, Dylan really paid attention to details. Claire's eyes were dark, almost black, like Camilla's, like his own. Her hair was dark brown with strands that gleamed in the morning sun. She had a dimple in her chin when she smiled, a dimple Dylan had only just noticed in himself. "Daddy," "You're looking at me funny," Claire said, smiling. Dylan blinked, realizing he had been staring. "Sorry, Princess, I was just thinking." "About what?" "About you." Claire smiled even brighter, as if it were the greatest compliment in the world. "Will you stay home today?" Dylan looked at his watch. He had 3 meetings scheduled, 2 international calls and a business lunch. His calendar was full, as always. "I can't today, sweetie, but—" "Okay," Claire interrupted without bitterness. "I know you have to work." The ease with which she accepted rejection broke Dylan's heart. She no longer even expected him to stay. She had learned not to. "Claire," he said, standing up from the table, Tomorrow will be just ours, okay?" "I promise." Claire nodded, but Dylan saw she didn't really believe it. How many times had he made that same promise? "All right, Daddy." Eleanor appeared in the kitchen carrying Claire's lunchbox. "Let's go, sweetie. It's time for school." Claire jumped off the chair and ran to give Dylan a goodbye kiss. "I love you, Daddy." "I love you too," he replied, hugging her tightly. And for the first time, Dylan wondered, did she somehow unconsciously know they were connected by more than choice? Was there a biological bond he had never noticed? In the car, on the way to the office, Dylan couldn't concentrate. He looked in the rearview mirror at Claire waving from the window and wondered, was she really his daughter? And if so, what did that change? She was already his. She had been from the moment he found her in that box. He had registered her as his daughter, loved her as such, but knowing she might carry his blood, did that change anything? Dylan thought about the little things he had never noticed before. How Claire furrowed her brow when she was focused, exactly like he did in important meetings. How she bit her lower lip when she was nervous, a habit he had since childhood. How she was stubborn in a very specific way that reminded him of his own personality. He had always thought they were coincidences. That children picked up those behaviors by watching the adults around them. But what if it wasn't learning? What if it was genetics? At the office, Dylan tried to work normally, but his mind was elsewhere. During the morning meeting, while they discussed expansion strategies, he found himself thinking about how Claire arranged her toys with the same meticulousness he arranged his contracts. "Mr. Fox?" Margaret's voice brought him back to reality. "Sorry," Dylan said, looking around the conference room. "Could you repeat the question?" The other executives exchanged glances. Dylan Fox never got distracted in meetings. He was known for absolute focus and quick absorption of information. "We were discussing the timeline for the merger with Peterson Industries," one of the directors said. "Right, let's reschedule for next week. I need to review some numbers." After everyone left, Margaret stayed behind. "Mr. Fox, is everything okay? You seem distant today." Dylan hesitated. Margaret had worked with him for 10 years. She was discreet, efficient, and one of the few people he fully trusted. "Margaret, I need to hire someone, a private investigator." She blinked, surprised. "A PI? May I ask why?" "I need to locate someone. A former employee, Camila Rodriguez. She worked here about 2 years ago on the cleaning staff." Margaret nodded. Without asking more questions, that was one of the qualities Dylan valued most in her. "I'll arrange it. Do you know a specific investigator?" "No, but I want the best. Someone discreet and efficient. This is personal, Margaret. Very personal." "Understood. I'll make some calls." That afternoon, Dylan was in his office when Margaret knocked on the door. "Mr. Fox, I found contact info for a PI, James Morrison. He has excellent references and is known for discretion. He's worked with several prominent families." "Great, schedule a meeting. He can come now if you'd like. He's in town." Dylan nodded. 30 minutes later, a middle-aged man with grey hair and keen eyes entered his office. He wore a simple but well-tailored suit, exuding professionalism that inspired confidence. "Mr. Fox, I'm James Morrison. I understand you need to locate someone." "Exactly. A woman named Camila Rodriguez, about 25 years old, dark hair, brown eyes. She worked here 2 years ago as cleaning staff." Morrison took notes in a small notebook. Any additional information? Last known address? Relatives? Friends? Dylan hesitated. She was studying nursing at the time, local college, likely attending classes during the day. She lived alone, as far as I recall. She was an honest and hard-working person. Reason for the search? Dylan felt a tightening in his chest. Personal, very personal. Morrison nodded, not prying. It may take a few days, perhaps a week. Can I call you once I have information? Yes, and Morrison, this is strictly confidential. It can't be leaked to anyone. Of course. I always work with total discretion. The next few days were torture for Dylan. He tried to maintain his routine, but was constantly distracted. He observed Claire with intense scrutiny, searching for clues, resemblances, confirmations. During Wednesday's dinner, Claire talked about a school project. The teacher asked us to draw our families, she said, showing a colored sheet. Look what I made. The drawing showed 3 figures. A tall man in a suit, clearly Dylan, a woman with gray hair, Eleanor, and a small girl in a blue dress, Claire. All smiling, holding hands in front of a large house. That's beautiful, Dylan said, studying the drawing. But why didn't you draw a mother? Claire furrowed her brow. Eleanor takes care of me like a mother, and you're my father. That's a family, right? The simplicity of her answer touched Dylan deeply. It is, Princess. It's a perfect family. But that night, alone in his office, Dylan couldn't stop thinking, what if Claire actually had a mother? What if Camilla wanted to be in her daughter's life? How would that affect the dynamic they had built? Claire noticed her father's changed behavior. Daddy, why do you keep looking at me so much? She asked one Thursday morning. They were having breakfast together, a rare occurrence since Dylan usually left before she woke up. But in recent days, he had been arriving late to the office, just to spend a few minutes longer with her. Can't I look at my beautiful daughter? He replied, trying to sound casual. You can, Claire said, smiling. But it's different. You look as if you're seeing me for the first time. The girl's observation surprised him. At 5, she was already very perceptive. Maybe I am, Dylan murmured. How so? Dylan searched for the right words. Sometimes you look at someone you love and notice new things, things that were always there, but you never paid attention to. Claire furrowed her brow, thoughtful. She had inherited that focused expression from him, Dylan realized. What kind of things? How smart you are, how big your heart is, how you love me even when I don't deserve it. Claire smiled and reached out her small hand to touch his face. You always deserve it, Daddy, because you're my dad. Her words moved Dylan more than they should have. She was right, he was her father. He had been since he scooped her up that night in the cold. Blood or not, Claire was his daughter. But now he needed to know the truth. For Claire, for himself, and maybe for Camilla too. On Friday, Morrison called. Mr. Fox, I located Camilla Rodriguez. Dylan's heart raced. Where is she? She's here in the city. Lives in a small apartment in a residential neighborhood near downtown. 847 Palm Street. Apt 301. She works as a housekeeper, cleaning private homes. Dylan noted the address carefully. Anything else? She lives alone. A simple life. No luxuries. Pays her rent on time but doesn't have much left over. Works about 6 days a week to cover her expenses. She's known as honest and dedicated by her clients. Keeps few social contacts. And, does she have children? There was a pause. Not that I could confirm. She keeps her life private. No neighbors mentioned children, and no family photos were visible in her apartment. Dylan closed his eyes. Of course she wouldn't have other children visible. If Claire was really her daughter, Camilla had given her up. She had put her in a box and left her for someone else to raise. Anything else important, Mr. Fox? How is she financially? She lives on the bare minimum, makes rent payments but has little to spare. She works hard, always appeared to be someone who doesn't ask for help. Anything else, Mr. Fox? No. Thank you, Morrison. Please send your full report to my assistant. Dylan hung up and stood there, staring out his office window. Camilla was just a few miles away, living a simple life, working honestly, without asking for anything, not looking for him, not trying to get in touch, not knowing the daughter she had abandoned was being raised by the child's father. If indeed Claire was her daughter, Dylan needed certainty. He needed to talk to Camilla.